code base. So basically, we're trying to build kind of like an exchange system that you can use to exchange from dollars to naira and naira back to dollar, right? So yeah, as every code we start from the main. So let me just explain the structure for you. This is CMD. That's where all the my server resides, server, router, the main. As we are in the main file right now. So if you can navigate to where I'm initiating my routers. This way I set up my router here. This way I call the whole. I might explain, take my time to explain this, and maybe you can just send me some questions if you have one. So this way, as I'm setting up my router, you can see the different endpoints that you can basically call. So config config, this holds my config files, um all the variables that I need to run the code. You can see there's a port here. I'm calling my port from my .env file, which is meant to be secret anyways. You can see that. So I'm calling my port, my JWT token, my database connection, and then the um very important, we are connecting to an endpoint for the to get the rates that we need for this, and the URL is just right here. So keep that in mind. Exchange URL. So let's keep the deploy for now. We'll come back to deploy later. Then we have the internal system. The internal has all the workings of the code base, the starting from the what do you call it, database, from database to controllers, from middleware and authentication ports, where each which everything is connected. We have the services. These services are more like external, what I said, function. We have JWT here for JWT token. We have the utilities here for just one function basically that I need to use in almost different parts of the file, so we can't easily put it in one part of the file, right? And that's probably just hashing a password. And we also have the error, the web that handles the error messages, the c.json messages, because I have to we customize the c.json messages here to display. So let's navigate to the database, right? So this is the database. We can easily just go to the database here. We can easily just go to the database here. So this is our database, right? Yeah, this is our database. But before we come to this, let's go to how we are connecting the database, which is here. We'll come back to this mock folder. The mock folder is for testing, so we'll come back to that. Let's go to how we connect the database. We connect the database using the Mongo client. This the basic structure. We are using this to get the URI and the timeouts. Um, we have a default timeout so that anytime anytime we do need to shut down the system, it's actually easier for us to do that. Yeah. So this is this where we this is where we need to we're passing this we're passing the config here, this config struct here, and then hopefully it returns back a client for us. It returns back this Mongo client for us. All it does is we most of these functions are they are there, right? Once you go through documentation, you don't really need to put this on your head. They're always in the documentation, right? So that. We use the timeout here, use the URI here. So when we are going into the database queries, the database services itself, you can see I made the timeout here 10, which is what is being this way we initialize the database for the services. We pass in the config. Remember the config I just showed you that has the URI and the timeout. So when you pass it in here, I made the URI is config.mongodb, config.mongo URI, which is gotten from here, and it's gotten from the environment variable, and then the timeout is 10. Just it's basic thing there. So we created our database name, this database that we are using, Exchange, and then we created two collections. Since we are writing for both user, the user authentication, logins, and maybe get balance of user, and then we have transactions, get transaction, perform transactions. So just for simplicity's sake, we have like two collections, which is collection, user collection and transaction collection, and that's what I am connecting to here, and that's what we are returning the adapter. This we are returning this adapter. So if you want to see how we initialize, how we call that in the services, just to go to the stats. Once in the start, we basically just call our config file first, just to get all the config stuff. Like I said, the config, just to get this, we call this, which is going to return all these. After you're going to get all these variables for us and return it for us. And once we get return that variable, if I can migrate to where I was, yeah, if we once we return that variables, we initialize this, which we use the config. If you remember, we pass in the config there, and it gives us our DB, right? And that's the DB we are going to use when we are working with our handler, right? So out to the services, what do we have here? Basic thing here, we create a user. One thing I have to point, there are different ways of creating users so that you can you don't need to store the password. You might need to store the password hash though. And how do you hash password? Some people use bcrypt. You can use bcrypt, but I just thought it would be fun to just generate a random salt at every interval, and then use that to hash the password, right? So we'll get to the salt later. And just for the sake of not having multiple people use the same email address to what do you call it, to register, I felt it wise to actually hash the email address and to actually hash the email address, right? One, and then convert it to on and then convert it to what do you call it, to the object in ID for hex, right? So that and then we will now use that as our object ID here, so that anybody with the same email address that wants to register again, since ID by default is meant to be unique, it's going to throw an error or duplicate, because of if you're having the same ID and instead I'm matching it with a sort of no string, right? Zero string. So what this does is you hash the email first and foremost, so you can you get the primitive dot object ID from the email, so you can use that as your ID, which is going to be unique for everybody. So every email you put is going to be unique. I didn't do too much validation. I didn't want to bug you guys too much with all those validation. And you get just the basic information: full name, phone number, email address. Again, you save the email address just for viewing sake, and then the password hash. So how do we do this? So like I talked about sort. So let's go to here, go to that function. So what this does is just generates random strings, right? That's just what this does. Nothing too fancy. Generate random strings, and you save those strings here, because those strings, that's the sort you want to use to form an hash, a password hash, or whatever hash you want to form. So if you go to that compute hash function, right, you're going to, you see it takes in maybe a password or whatever, and then the sort, and then it does the hash here and returns the string. So it will be hard for people to pretty much guess your password, and you know. So now when you are when a user wants to log in, we actually assign a default $100 to that user, because that's the money we are going to be trading, changing $100 to naira, Nigerian naira to 100, just vice versa, right? So that's for create. So now let's go to the handle which we create user. There are other things there too. If you want to look at it, we'll take a look at that later. So when we go to this handle, when when we go to this handle, right, where we are creating the user, where that if I can locate it, yeah, there's a controller. Yeah, that's where my controllers are, right? This is the test, so we'll come back to test. An important thing I do is, right, there's a file called ports, right? Ports is where you connect your database, your different databases or your different whatever you're working with, you connect it with ports so that you can use it. So that from ports you can then use it when you're creating your handle. It's more like it's used for connection. So right now I have two services in port. I have my databases here and I have rates here. So in solid principle, there's this what do you call it? Um, an interface should only execute what the interface is meant for. That's why I couldn't put these rates here, get rates in database, because get rates is doing totally different thing entirely. It's getting the rates of USD, USD and Naira from the what do you call it, from the URL I showed you earlier in my .env file that is called in my config. That's what it's doing. It has nothing to do with the database. So how do we connect these ports to our system so that we can use it when creating? It's simple, by the way. Just if you go back to where I'm calling everything, I've shown you where we are getting this from, right? So now the rates is also a port. So basically, once you return this, once you return this, if you overround it, it will tell you that it's returning an adapter, and that adapter is it's what the interface, this port interface is actually connected to, right? Adapter. So that adapter holds all the method that that port is being connected to. For example, this adapter, right? So once you're returning this adapter, and you have access to all the methods under it, which is also the methods that are being used here in this port. Same thing with the rates. If you return the rates, let's just go there for you to see. Let's navigate down there ourselves to the rates folder. There you go. You return this rates, basic thing that we did do for what do you call it? You return it for DB. You return it. You put your config there. You return it, and it gives you the method, which is just one method anyway, that is that is um that is connected to this client, and then that method is the same method that is being called here. So basically that's what happens when you once you are returning it, you are getting the rates and all these methods back the same way, the same thing, you're getting the div and all these methods back. And yeah, you just have your handler, your control handler. So you now initialize your control handler. So let's go to where, so for the control handler, you can see we are initializing port.db. I've showed you the port.db, initializing the port.rate. I also need the config file. This is customary just in case you might need something from the config file, so that in case, so that one is easy to get. So this is where you initialize that in here. You're already getting your config file here, because obviously you need your config to get your DB to keep your DB running, and also get your rates from the config too. So that's the same config that you're using to initialize this, right? Then you use that to set up the router. We might get into that later. And then from that, the ports that you're getting from the environment variable, you see this is the port right there. You're getting that port from your config file .port. If not, still run on port 8085. And then the listener serve. You do listener serve. You put in a go routine, so that every time if you are breaking out of that go routine, you are hitting the graceful shutdown. Why graceful shutdown is always important is because you don't just shut down abruptly. You have to give your applications, like your database, other things, time for them to shut down. That's why you put context. You pass in context in those functions. So once you're shutting, so this context, once you're passing in that shutdown with time, with the context of 5 seconds, and then it's going to give 5 seconds before the whole system shuts down. This enables you to prevent any data loss or things like that. You can research on context later, I guess. So basically, that's where this is. And customary to me, right? Customary, I like to test whatever I'm working with exactly. Like maybe I'll write a ping message to know that yes, um, this is working, right? I know the system is not started yet, but this system has been hosted. It's being hosted on what do you call it? There's a README by the way, so you might need to check that out for you to read this. So this system is being hosted on. You can see that this is the what do you call it? That the ports, right? So you can just copy this just to test if it's still online. I believe it should be by the way. So just copy this. The ping, that's the ping that I just showed you, the ping endpoint. So you can just open here just to show, just to be sure that see, you can see the message pong. Yeah, that's the message pong, right? So that system is still up and running, right? Basically, that's the message that you expected to see, the message pong. Right, so we're at the create user. So when you're going to the, like I said, that it's divided into users and transactions. So once you get to the user, there's a sign up. This is where we create the user. What do? You get, yeah. I need to talk about the models. The models, this way you keep all your models. I divide into transactions and users. Kept all the models. You can see how you for what do you call it? For Mongo is Bison, so you might need to take note of that. But once you're getting something for all my requests, when you're getting requests from the front end, yeah, you're requesting using JSON. You know, JSON is that's what the front end used to pass in the data to you, right? JSON. But when you're saving it in Mongo, you're saving Bison basically, right? So you can just maybe keep that in mind. So yeah, this is the request. I'm showing you the request. It's just full name, number, email address. So basically, the idea is when you get this, you pass it the request down to the create user, which we already showed you earlier. And what that create user does, like I said earlier, generates a salt for it for that user, and gets the ID hex ID primitive.hex ID that's going to use as an ID. As you can see, the ID has to be primitive.x, right? And now use the other things that the full name, email, get the primitive.x ID from the email address of that request. Apart from that, then do the password hash from that password and the salt created earlier, right? The salt that is, and save the salt, so we can use it for authentication, verification later. Gives $300, right? Wow, to the user, and then the balance of naira still zero. Then creates they created at time, right? Easy, nothing too major there. So we're back to user. That's what the sign up does. Login. So what login does is just takes the user, what do you call it, user request, which is just the email and password, and then you bind it here. I need to talk about binding. Binding is like you're getting the request into a struct, this struct. Then you find the user by email. That's a function here. Data is still a database function. Since the database method, I mean. And like I said, initially our ID was being we use hash. The email, if you remember when we were creating the user, is still the same thing with without a salt. So the same thing, but we're doing the same thing without the salt. So now you're passing it in here. You're finding the wherever this ID, right, is equals to this. You decode this into user here, and then return it. It's as easy as that. You're finding you're trying to get user by email. So you might need to check out this, right? Why you might ask why is it that's the bison. That's what MongoDB understands anyways. That's the bison. So that's it. So you go back to the user. Go back to the user. Yeah, you're getting the users. Yeah, if you can't get that user, though, probably this is good. You cannot solve error. It's always good to return an error you can relate with, but also be careful with the kind of error you return, so that some people might want to use your system and for other purposes that so you might need that's most time we return internal server error. You might be wondering what's internal server error, but at least you can relate with this cannot retrieve user, right? So once you get the user, so you can't just log in like that. You need to still do the password verification for your login. That's why I moved this compute hash to utils because I'm going to still use it in other place apart from this. So you get the password, you get the use. You have gotten the user already. So you get the sort of the user, and from there you compare it with the user password hash that was saved, and if that's good it goes, if not it gives you invalid password, as easy as that. And here you generate your token. That's a whole another ball game entirely. This way you generate token for authenticated routes so that let's say all these things pass, you're going to be logged in. So let's take a step back and check out the generated token since we're already here. Most of this standard code how to generate token. You can claims and token, you can just browse about that. Basically it validates for 24 hours. I don't want to start logging in and logging out by the so you can just try and get that. But yeah, it's all there. You can also get the code base and go through what was done there and send in your questions. But an important thing I might want to point out is the middleware authentication, right? Because when a user, right, logs in, when a user wants to use an authenticated route, what we need to do, we need to check first of all. By the way, you use the JWT secret to validate and claim the claim. So basically, when you generate a token, right, while logging in, when that same user wants to use an authenticated route, which is linked to this authorized user, like let me see if I can navigate down there for you. Just a quick navigation, which basically set up router, right? See middleware dot authorized user. So this these endpoints are linked to this. So by the way, once you log in, you're getting that token. So we are going to try and query that token from using this authorized user, which is where we were. Yeah. So by the way, you get your JWT token from what you call environment variable, which is um which is going to be released from when you get it in your environment variable, this.env, whatever environment you have to pass in the token. And then yeah, you get the context from the header, and from that header, right, you get your token from get token from header. So if you go down here, you see all it's doing is just requesting the authorization, which ought to have been in place before you make that call, right? So that's it. Where were we? Yeah. So you're getting the context here, and then you're validating your access token and claims, as easy as that. So if it's not, it returns. If you're not authorized, it returns unauthorized. Yeah. And then, but if that goes through, right? If that goes through, the idea is that um the idea of the whole claim is that let me just show you something when you're generating a token, right? When you generate a token, right, you also generate a claim with an email address here, right? You're generating your claim with an email address. So that is why you can easily get your email address from your claims. I hope I didn't confuse you there, but anyways, let's go ahead. So the idea is that once you get that, so you access token, you can always get the email address, right? Like I said, you're getting your email address from. So if you go into this function, right? If you navigate into this function, this is how you generate tokens. You generate it with your email address there, and then you save it as the email address. That's how you save it, and then you return it, right? So whenever you are here, you can easily have access to access claims of email address. Basically, this access claim you're returning, this way you're returning the access claim, you can have access to that, and email address is there. So then you can now use that email to get that user, right? I've showed you how to get the user, the whole decoding that goes on in this function. You get the user, and then after that, once you get that user, right, you just basically just save that user here. just return that user and then set the access token that you used. Set the access token that you use for the verification and all those. Just you can pass it back or pass it back to wherever user that needs to use it. But most importantly, you need to set that user here, right? So that whatever information you need from that user, you can easily get it from your token, right? You can easily get it from your function, the function that is using that authorized route that has passed. So basically, that is it. Um, Back to the control.user, right? So now you log in there. So after you log in, you get your token. You still set the user and return it basically because we are going to still get this token. This is the token we need to put in our bearer token when we are making this calls, and basically that's it basically, right? So yeah, that's for login. This is an authenticated route. Like I said, you're getting user from context. You want to I just get user profile, get user balance, basically the same thing, but by the way, just returning different. All you have to do is you're getting this what do you call it? You're getting this user. Since you pass the user, since you pass the user in here, right? In this context, when you authorize the user, so you can easily just get it here, like I pointed out initially. Just get it from the context. The key there is user. Once you get that user, you just, since it's a map, you convert that map to the normal user struct and then return it. As easy as that. So basically, you're getting the user. You have gotten those users. You are returning the user here, and you can easily do whatever data you want to do with that user. Here we are just returning some data, full name, phone numbers, just for the profile, for you to know the profile. The same thing done here, although we are just returning the balances, the Naira balances. So the user part is pretty much okay, I guess. User part is pretty much okay. So I will okay. So let's, for this video is getting too long, so I might actually want to break it down and let's explain the transaction and maybe the deployment in the next video. Alright, just give me a minute.